chronological order of 76 rulers from Menes to Sihon I. We also have the Karnak royal list, found in the Louvre, containing 61 rulers from Menes to Thutmose I. These two lists provide us with insight into Upper Egypt's traditions. According to Saqqara, 47 kings preceded and included Ramses II. This list is completed by the royal list of Karnak found in the Louvre, which lists 61 rulers in it to Thutmose I. These two lists offer insight into the tradition of Upper Egypt. Now there is no more fear, and the road is clear, the sky is clear and gray. I know what I'll do. I'll put my faith in a body true. A team that knows the way to fight for me now every day. And that's my kind of body. The united Australian body. And that's my kind of body. The united Australian body. I'm a starting gun. You know we just begun. So make a shit great. We got it in us, made. United Southern Sons. Oh, we might vote. Oh, let's train the court. Australia's history. Oh, let us follow around. We're going to hit the ground. Make happy antidote. I know what I'll do. Gonna put my faith with the virus. So that ensure the government is trying to change it. To make sure a new government term that will give hope to the people and stop what's happening in this country. And that's my kind of body. Yeah, that's my kind of body. The United Australian body. Upper Egypt. The Turin papyrus is more significant than any of the above. Written on the verso of the papyrus is a hieratic text which accounts Ramses II's reign, which gives the approximate date circa 1200 BC. Since the script on the papyrus is excellent, it must have been an artistically beautiful exemplar in its original state. In the papyrus are the names of over 300 kings, giving the length of each reign in years, months, and days. As the complete edition of the papyrus has not yet been published, further study should yield different results. Like Manetho, the papyrus begins with dynasties of gods, followed by mortal kings also in dynasties. The papyrus opens, like Manetho, with the dynasties of gods observed by dynasties of mortal kings. In this book, the change of dynasty is noted, and the sum of the reigns is given. Like in Manetho, several dynasties are added collectively. Some of the kings from Menes to Unas at the end of Dynasty 5. The composition on the papyrus is like that in the Epitome of Manetho. Several fascinating details are revealed in Manetho's account of the so-called divine Egyptian rulers and their dynasties, which he divides into three categories. There are gods, those who fought, there are shining ones, creator gods. Eusebius, patriarch of Caesarea in Palestine, and Susalus also wrote of a lineage of gods who ruled on earth for 36,000 years. Afterwards, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt ruled as mortals. A king's list. Turin King List or Turin's royal canon, is a unique papyrus currently in the Egyptian Museum in Turin, written in Hieratic. Hence, it is a modern name. There are over 160 fragments, many of which have been lost. It appeared intact when discovered in the Theban necropolis in 1822 by Italian traveller Bernardino Robetti. By the time the object became part of the collection of the Egyptian Museum in Turin, its condition had severely deteriorated. King List of Turin. It was first recognized as necessary by the French Egyptologist Jean-François Champollion, who later was followed by Gustavus Seifert, who took up its reconstruction and restoration. While they arranged most of the fragments correctly, their diligence came too late, and many cavities remain in the papyrus. The recto contains a list of names of persons and institutions, along with what appears to be tax assessments for each. Written during the long rule of Ramses II, the papyrus is estimated to be 1.7 meters in length and 0.41 meters in height. The papyrus's verso is the most exciting part. It contains a list of gods, demigods, spirits, mythical and human kings who were thought to rule Egypt since before time began, until the composition of this crucial document began. Now that the beginning and end of the list are lost, we do not know whether there was ever an introduction to the list and an enumeration of the kings following the 17th dynasty. Because this list of kings was written on the verso after the tax list was composed on the recto, we cannot know when it was collected. There is a possibility that this took place during the reign of Ramses II, but it could occur as late as the 20th dynasty. Because this list of kings was written on the verso after the tax list was composed on the recto, we cannot know when it was collected. The list was scribbled on an older papyrus, which suggests it was of no great importance to the writer. Could a scribe have copied it through exercise? We do not know what sources our scribe used to compile the list. Was he copying an existing papyrus? If so, for what reason? Additionally, what has become of the original? What is the process for compiling that? Is it possible that the scribe, having access to the temple archives, compiled the list using old tax notes, decrees, and other documents? The scribe compiled the list himself using old tax notes, decrees, and documents in the temple archives. The latter possibility is less likely, and would show that the Turin king list is unique. Several other lists list the predecessors of a king, such as those in the temples of Seti I and Ramses II at Abydos, to name but two. So what makes the Turin king list so unique? The other lists are valuable for studying ancient Egyptian chronology, but they are nothing but an enumeration of the ancestors of the current king. There is often an image of the current king or one of his contemporaries adoring the cartouches or representations of the king's ancestors. The present king is the ideal heir, since he respects his long line of ancestors. The word ancestor cannot be taken literally, since the current king was not a descendant of most of his predecessors. Lists like these were more cultic and political. The current king is a rightful heir to the kings who ruled Egypt for centuries. Rather than enumerating all kings, these lists focus on cultic predecessors. King Menes and King Mentuhotep II, who played pivotal roles in ancient Egypt history, will most likely be included. Some of the lesser-known kings, usurpers, or illegitimate kings, such as the Amarna Revolution, were omitted. Besides listing some kings, the Turin king list groups them and mentions their reigning period. Some otherwise unpopular kings have left off the topic lists, such as Hyksos. Even though it begins with the list of gods, demigods, spirits, and mythical beings who are supposed to have governed Egypt before Menes' rule, it was not a cult list, and it serves no function other than to show that the current king is the rightful heir to his ancestors. Initially, there were an unknown number of columns or sheets for the Turin king list, of which only 11 remain. There were at least 25 lines in columns 1 to 5, at least 27 lines in column 6. In addition, there were at least 30 lines of text in columns 9 and 10. The Turin King List has initially been divided into an unknown number of columns or sheets, of which only 11 have survived. A scribe must have realized that his papyrus would not be large enough to write all the royal names known to him in 25 or 26 lines. This is especially true as the canon nears its end. Cartouches usually contain the name of a particular king. The number of years he ruled is followed by months and days. Many kings of the first and second dynasties are credited with such long reigns that they are probably not accurate. Some have speculated that this high number of years is not a reflection of how long a king reigned, but his age when he died. While this cannot be ruled out entirely, it is strange that the writer notes the age of a king in one instance and the duration of his rule in another. It would seem that the scribe mistook the ancient king's year labels as representations of different years when they most likely refer to the same year. The names of the first three dynasties are also written in a cartouche, although cartouche names were not used before the Wu, the last king of the first dynasty. These kings' cartouche names are often similar to those of the Coptic king list, but they are pretty different from their official Horus names. For the later kings of the first dynasty, the Turin king list appears to be based on their Nephi names, but there is no data on how the earlier kings of the first dynasty and other kings of the second and third dynasties got their names. According to where they lived, the kings are arranged logically by city. Interestingly, these groups do not entirely correspond to the dynasties Manetho basically lived in. According to the city where they lived, the kings are grouped logically. This shows that the notion of dynasties was not present or fully developed before the 19th or 20th dynasty. Groups usually include a line that totals the number of years in power. Some summaries are written on one line, others on two lines, and sometimes on one line so long that it infringes on the next column. Sometimes a group is introduced by a heading. It might result from the fragmentary nature of the canon that there are far fewer headings than summations. There may be more to this inconsistency than an error by the scribe who copied the list. The Turin king list is among our most reliable sources of knowledge about the chronology of Egypt between the 1st and 17th dynasties, despite its incompleteness and fragmentary nature. These pages contain a hieroglyphic transcription of the part of the Turin king list which lists actual kings. The transcription is based on the Turin king list by Alan H. Gardner. Despite being a relatively old publication, the first edition was published in the late 1950s, the arrangement proposed by Gardner is still widely accepted by Egyptologists today. Since his publication, several fragments have been placed. The canon will not yet reflect this change. Ancient Egypt's Lost Legacy. The Great Pyramid stands out as humanity's most outstanding architectural feat. 2.5 million blocks, measuring in size from 2 to 70 tons each, were used to construct this silent sentinel of the past. There are 3 identical structures on the Giza Plateau, and this one is the largest and perhaps the most mysterious. More stone is found in the Great Pyramid than in all the churches, chapels, and cathedrals built in England. The structure covers an area of 30 acres and weighs 6 million tons. It was the tallest building before the Eiffel Tower was built. The wonder of the past is more than just an architectural curiosity. Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands compete in the Super Rugby Pacific competition every night at 3 live and on demand. Super Rugby Pacific on the home of rugby's second sport. As it represents a level of sophistication unsurpassed by anything since this age. Many hundreds of books have been published about the mysteries of the Great Pyramid over the past 200 years, most of them more fantasy than fact. All of them point to the fact that the pyramid builders gained universal knowledge far beyond what was known to ancient Egyptians living around 4,500 years ago. This was when the pyramids were said to have been built. Here are a few examples. It is speculated that the Great Pyramid was built as an exact representation of the Earth's northern hemisphere. The exterior and interior designs incorporated precision geometry, harmonics, proportions, and sound acoustics. The four sides of the Great Pyramid align with the cardinal points with such precision that modern-day surveyors would have difficulty replicating it on the Earth. The Great Pyramid occupies the center of the largest landmass on the planet. There is also the extraordinary possibility that the pyramid builders had sonic technology capable of raising stone blocks into the air. This could have been used to pierce through granite at a speed rate unmatched even today. Ancient Egypt's temples and monuments show a deep understanding of sound acoustics. According to a legend preserved by an Arab author of the 10th century named al-Masudi, the builders of the pyramids moved stone blocks over an avenue of poles with one bow shot by hitting them with a rod. According to legends from Bolivia, Mexico, and Greece, the first cities were built by mythical figures who raised stones to the sky by simply using sand. Indian legends speak of the first inhabitants of Tiwanaku, high on Bolivia's hottest llano, being able to transport stones from the local quarry to their homes by themselves to the center of the continent. What is the reality behind such wild claims? Should all of them be dismissed as the naive delusions of primitive people? Impossible to achieve precision. In the 1880s, Egyptologist W. M. Flinders Petrie studied the temples and monuments of Giza and found evidence of a precision stoneware technique that was superior to anything else accomplished in the ancient world. The coffin inside the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid was constructed using 9-foot-long jewel-tipped saws. The pyramid builders also used highly specialized drilling techniques to bore precise holes in dense granite. They also fashioned beautiful bowls in dense zeolite and fashioned exquisite stone vases with openings no more extensive than the length of a fingernail. In his recent study of ancient Egyptian stoneware, American technologist Christopher Dunn proves that the ancient Egyptians employed ultrasound to enhance their drilling ability. It may seem out of reach, but this author has uncovered substantial evidence that Tibetan monastic communities as late as the 20th century used ultrasound vibration to destroy physical matter and create weightlessness in stone blocks. It has also been revealed that a 19th century maverick scientist named John Ernst Worrell Keeley independently discovered a way to raise heavy objects into the air and dissolve granite using sympathetic vibratory apparatus. 4,500 years ago, how did the pyramid builders gain a deep understanding of science and technology that we still do not understand today? What happened to all this lost technology, and why has so much only been rediscovered now? To answer these questions, we must embark on a journey into a virtually alien world inhabited by a lost culture of priestly elites. They lived in Egypt's fertile Nile Valley during a distant epoch long before the accepted genesis of civilization. There will be evidence of Giza of buildings and monuments built by this elder race. In addition, there will be evidence in an underworld complex called the Hall of Records beneath the Great Sphinx. To truly understand this mystery, we should return to the Giza Plateau and examine its bizarre megalithic temples, which suggest a construction date long before the Pyramid Age. The temples of the gods. According to Egyptologists, the Valley Temple, which sits on the plateau's ridge, was built around 2550 BC during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. A stone causeway links it to another ancient temple on the eastern side of the Pyramid, which is also attributed to Khafre. kind to other temples on the Giza Plateau, and its proximity to the Great Sphinx. In addition, statues of Capri were discovered abandoned in a well beneath its floor. Recent geological investigations of the Great Sphinx have shown that the weathering effects visible on its body and the enclosure wall nearby were not caused by wind, as Egyptologists believe, but by water precipitation, rain. Over the years, there has become a big deal of it. Having such a hypothesis creates insurmountable problems for academics, because it is known that the last time Egypt had enough rain to create such raging torrents of water was between 8,000 and 5,000 BC. However, more damning to Egyptologists' orthodox view is that astronomical research regarding the orientation and placement of monuments on the Giza Plateau points towards a construction date sometime between 11,000 and 9,000 BC, many thousands of years before.
When change happens, like a sea change, think you. For a car and home insurer that can save you money by covering you with legal life stats right now. You insure.
For the age of the pharaohs. What are the chances of that happening? In the period under consideration, the 11th and 10th millennia BC, the Nile Valley was inhabited only by bands of people living in small huts or shelters and supporting themselves by hunting and gathering. In addition, these early Nilotic, i.e. those living by the Nile communities, did not build monumental stone structures of any kind, and did not take even the first steps toward domestication of plants and animals. Simply put, this is not true. Between 12,500 and 9,500 BC, specific communities developed the earliest agriculture and possessed an advanced tool-making culture. During the same period, prehistoric people lived along the Nile during this same age. Furthermore, just 300 miles away from Giza, in what is today Jericho, its inhabitants of 8,000 BC were erecting enormous fortification walls, cutting out vast trenches in the rocky bedrock, and building a giant stone tower to defend against an unknown enemy. Projects of this scale would have required a high social structure and coordinated operation. Humanity could not have carved the image of a 240-foot-long recumbent lion in this distant era, but accepting this hypothesis brings with it an even more significant problem. The core limestone blocks, many of which weighed over 100 tons each, were used in the Valley Temple, the Sphinx Temple, and at least one other similar structure on the Giza Plateau dating back to the same distant period. These massive temple structures were merely restored by the pharaohs of the Pyramid Age, which begs who built them. It was the epoch of the elder gods. Ancient Egyptians believed their culture and religion were derived directly from a divine grace that existed thousands of years before the emergence of the pharaohs. The incomplete royal papyrus of Turin, dating to the 19th dynasty approximately, an inscription from the year 1300 BC, lists 10 Nibiru, Ptah, Ra, Shu, Geb, Asa, Set, Peru, Tehuti, Mach, and Eru. The word simply means divinity, who ruled before the first kings of Egypt. The ancient Egyptians referred to the Gizeh necropolis as the splendid place of the first kind. They revered it as the abode of the gods who ruled their land during this misty epoch. The hieroglyphic building texts discovered on the walls of the Temple of Horus at Edfu in southern Egypt tell us much about the divine inhabitants of the Nile Valley during that period, the elder gods. An island of the gods. It is nearly impossible to imagine Giza any different today with its desert backdrop and its majestic sentinel-like pyramids that can't help but infuse a sense of permanence. Edfu's account, compiled from a series of now lost books attributed to the moon god Thoth, allows us to reconstruct how the Giza plateau may have looked over 11,000 years ago. around a shallow lake fed directly from the Nile is the best for the least. This ecosystem is similar to what one might see today in equatorial Africa. If we find a time machine and travel back to this distant era, we would find a hot, humid atmosphere alive with lush green vegetation. This hypothesis is not mere speculation, for it is known that the river used to flow closer to the plateau's edge in the past. In addition, evidence of a lake and dock dating back to Old Kingdom times has also been found beyond the plateau's western limb. In the eyes of the Shining Ones, this would represent the primordial sea of chaos from which the first land appeared at the beginning of time. Tall jet villas stood on the shores of this sacred lake. Standing close to the lake's banks was an enclosure wall behind which was a gleaming white temple called the Mansion of Wajisic Nete, the place of reeds. The point of first creation was symbolized by a small island in shallow waters crowned with a simple stone structure that declared its sanctity. This island is known as the Island of the Egg or the Island of Tampering in Hebrew documents. The stone structure is also associated with the Placidian well. We might have found indigenous people from the late Paleolithic age tending cultivated lands, herding domesticated animals, making beautiful wood tools, and harpooning fish in the nearby River Nile with wooden spears. There is another, altogether different person behind the tall, imposing walls of the sacred enclosure, commanding figures known as the Shetu, the sages, the elders, and the falcons. This strange assemblage of divine beings, whose number was said to be 60, is called the Netjeru, or divinity. These mythical individuals might have been shamans dressed in bird feathers, taking the form of birds. They also had radiant faces, which made them quite striking in appearance. Therefore, the Egyptians' writings offer a curious picture. Shamanic individuals built the first monuments and temples, but who exactly were they? Did they carve the Great Sphinx and the earliest megalithic monuments still standing in places like Giza and Abydos today? What happened to this lost culture, and what else might they have left behind as a legacy for life? There is a forward record. As we enter the new millennium, we make many significant discoveries on the Giza Plateau. No discovery can be more extraordinary than the discovery beneath the Sphinx's wedge-shaped enclosure of 9 concealed chambers of unnatural origin. The University of Florida and the Edgar Cayce Foundation were the first to discover these during seismic soundings of crystalline bedrock conducted in 1991 and 1996. Baryonic myths and legends speak of an underground world beneath the Giza Plateau. Today's psychics, cultists, and New Age mystics strongly believe that an underground complex made up of hidden corridors and unknown chambers will be discovered in Giza one day. Underworld complexes such as these are referred to as the Hall of Record, the Crystal Chambers, or the Chambers of Initiation. One American psychic named Edgar Cayce predicted that the Hall of Records would be discovered and opened in secret during 1998. According to the authors, it contains arcane wisdom and knowledge hidden from the world by Egypt's elder culture before the Great Flood. In July, the British Consortium of Surveyors and Geophysicists, backed by Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, will conduct a wide-scale search for the Hall of Records cases. What might they find there? What awaits them under the Giza Plateau? Underground tunnels and chambers beneath the Giza Plateau have been rumored since Roman times. Under the Giza Pyramid Field, Ammianus Marcellinus, AD 360 to 390, spoke of underground fissures and winding passages known as syringes. He said that they were erected by those acquainted with the ancient rites, since they knew there would be a deluge and feared that their memories would be destroyed. Did ancient rites have to be preserved to avoid being lost in flood? What echoes of the ancient gods lie slumbering below the limestone bedrock of the recent Giza project? The underworld of the soul. subterranean domain once stood beneath the island of creation on the edge of the deeper plateau, as described in the empty building tank. This structure was known as the Underworld of the Soul by the divine individuals known as Ship Q, who used handheld power objects to perform strange ceremonies. Variously described as embryo, seed, egg, lotus, and even the Bendem or Palace Stone, they gained radiance from a much greater object. This was regarded as the creative source of the island, embodying the male and female regenerative powers. While it is not specified what this object might have been, a conical-shaped stone resembling the lingam placed inside some Hindu temples could have been used similarly to the handheld power object used by the ship Q. Both of them embody the dualistic regenerative powers of the first creation. Is this what awaits discovery in Giza's underworld realm? Powerful lingam stones that were once used in strange rites by the precursors of dynastic Egypt. Will this be found inside the chambers of creation, the so-called Hall of Record, if discovered this year? There is absolutely no doubt that the ancient Egyptians believed that a physical object of immense creative power lay beneath the sands of Giza. As described in the esoteric literature known as the Coffin text, something is described as the sealed thing in darkness with fire about it. Eventually, the pyramid text came to be called Coffin text and were transcribed as a pirate, which became known as the Book of the Dead. All three sets of texts are called the Book of the Dead. In ancient Egyptian mythology, it was said to possess the Teflus of Osiris, the god of the underworld, and to have been placed in Wasaru, a name given to the Giza pyramid king. According to the text in question, this sealed thing has been hidden